Okay, well, good morning. And I really we all appreciate you joining us. I hear that the count of audience may be as many as 800. I like to think of it as more like thousands, but 800 is still a pretty good number. Good morning, panel. How are you all doing?
Good morning, Ash.
Morning.
Gosh, I am so pleased to be joined by 5 outstanding leaders. Hey, in a moment, here's what I'm going to do. You know, whenever I get introduced, I always feel a little embarrassed because they either say things that are either exaggerated or forget things that I wish they would say, like I'm a fancy dancer and a good dresser. So I'm going to leave the introductions to you all in a moment via a warm-up topic, okay? And we have quite a packed conversation to have. I'm going to create a little dialogue by asking all some questions. I'm hoping that we might be able to banter around some topics regarding market policy and even regulatory changes that are happening both in the built environment and utilities. And of course, you know, now we also have this unprecedented climate change funding and tax benefit through the Inflation Reduction Act that actually is pretty timely, not just for this panel, but maybe for this entire conference. So we've got a lot to cover in actually a relatively short amount of time. Hey, let me just offer up a little framing and then I'm immediately going to go into the warm-up questions. Okay, panel? Okay, thanks. So let me just say, you know, it seems to me that the energy value change is in need of change, and it needs to change at a pretty rapid pace. It needs to change so that we actually take on the impact of the climate crisis in a way that is extraordinary and very different, at least different than the career I've had in the built environment industry. Utilities are not likely going to be able to stop at the meter any longer. And building operators are going to need to find a way to create both balance with the natural environment and the grid, as well as other infrastructure. So before there was this DMZ that is the meter, and whether it was a real or figurative lease, there was a bit of a DMZ between the building owner and operations, not to say that you were ignoring operations as building owners, but in some ways, how a building was built and how it was operated was a bit different, at least in my experience. So now these 2 DMZs, you know, the meter and the lease, whether it be real or figurative, those have got to dissipate. We've got to run things in a more balanced way, again, for the sake of the natural environment, and actually because of the pressure that's coming, particularly on the electric grid, for the sake of the grid. That means that all parties need to collaborate, innovate, and invent solutions together to take on the challenges ahead. You know, in past, when I had mixed panels of building operators and owners and developers and utility folks and infrastructure folks, I found myself almost asking them 2 different sets of questions. But, you know, today I find that the questions that I'm going to be posing to you all are actually very relevant, whether you're a building developer, a designer, a builder, or an operator of facilities, or all the above. Today, we're going to need to cross those DMZs in ways that we have just begun to explore. And we're going to need to do that to accelerate the pace of how we take on the climate crisis and the decarbonization of the built environment, transportation, and overall infrastructure. So this panel could not be better at this moment to take on these topics and to take on this cross collaboration that's needed to happen. Okay, so thank you all for joining. And here's what I'd like to do. I'm going to go through and pick on each one of you. And here's what I'd like you to do. Maybe just give me a minute, give us all a minute of introduction to yourself. And then also maybe share a quick topic that you believe this audience should be aware of regarding the change that are occurring around us. Just a quick topic that you think we should all be aware of as you go through the introduction. Debra, do you want to kick us off with an intro? And by the way, thank you for joining us. You're muted, and your leadership over SCL, by the way, has been absolutely outstanding. Thank you.
I appreciate that, Ash. I really do. And by the way, I have to say, I put something on my LinkedIn last week. After COVID, I decided that the word unprecedented should be removed from our vocabulary because it was used so much, but you just used it with respect to the IRA and where we are at with federal funding for this crazy, crazy energy transformation that we are in the midst of. And I used it too last week on LinkedIn. I think when the IRA passed, that was the first time I felt like, okay, this kind of is unprecedented right now. So my name's Debra Smith, and I'm the general manager, CEO of Seattle City Light. I've had the honor to serve here in Seattle for about 4 years. Prior to that, I have spent 26, 27 years in this industry. So I had run a small distribution utility at the Oregon coast before that, and spent 17 years prior at the Eugene Water and Electric Board. So I am not a good dancer. I'm a very bad dancer. I am quite a flashy dresser, and folks who know me know that. And one of the things I will say that is super exciting in my life is I have a new second grandbaby on the way, pretty much any time now. And I, like to tell people I've been a professional and a working mom most of my life. In my generation, we got to kind of define what work-life balance looked like, and we've made so much progress. I'm proud of that. But I'm always a mom first and a nana first now. So there you go. The thing I want to leave you with is something that I think about all the time, and it's not something that lay folks tend to think a lot about. We tend to want to think about things like, removal of the lower Snake River dams, for instance, and that there's going to be a report issued this week. So a lot of people are thinking about that. But I'd like everyone to think about markets. So in the West, we do not have organized markets. As we continue to integrate renewable resources, and as we have a need to integrate significantly more renewable resource to meet the increased loads of electrification, markets will increasingly become important. And so again, the West is really the only part of the country that doesn't have an organized transmission operator, which is, in our world, we have very constrained transmission paths, especially in the West, and that really impacts reliability. So think about markets, and if you're not clear where things are at with respect to markets, maybe do a bit of checking. And I'll turn it back to you, Ash.
Hey, thank you. That's awesome. Congratulations, by the way. Wonderful, wonderful news. Hey, David, how are you?
Very good, Ash.
You're one of two members. I just have to tell the audience this. You're one of two individuals that are either recently transplanted from just over the border in Canada or are still in Canada. I think Wayne must be calling us down from Canada. So David, thank you. You're taking on a really amazing role at the University of Washington. Tell us a little about yourself and something that we should be aware of.
Sure. Thanks, Ash. So my name is David Woodson. I'm the Executive Director of Campus Energy, Utilities, and Operations at the University of Washington, and just started last November. 24 years previous to that, I was at the University of British Columbia in a similar role for the last 17 years or so. And UW's brought me on primarily for the decarbonization of the steam plant. That's the big carbon consumer on our campus. But really, it's the energy recapitalization. Really looking at how do we serve the University of Washington from an energy perspective for the next 100 years, or at least prepare the energy strategy that supports that. So I'm a UW alumni, so it's kind of like coming home to be able to help out with this pretty exciting challenge. We had a lot of success at UBC with initiatives that we put in place there. So kind of a second time round for me, and getting to apply what went great, and then also learn from lessons of the past. And if I were to pick one thing that really stands out, really was happening in Vancouver as well. Cooling's no longer a luxury anymore. Pacific Northwest, traditionally mild climate, And we could use passive house techniques to cool spaces. And now I think I just heard the other day that if we hit 90 degrees on Thursday, we're going to set a record for the number of days over 90 degrees this summer. So we had the heat dome last summer, we got this record this summer, and we have the forecast of what 2030, 2040, 2050 look like. And so I think that's a new reality. And I think that puts a lot of pressure on traditional mechanical cooling functions that depend on electricity. Hi, Debra, looking at you. And so I think that, requires us to not just be creative of how we're going to meet that need, but also be very efficient with the electricity that we do have and consume.
Yeah, that's excellent. Thanks for bringing up that point. I know you didn't intend to use the word creative, but you did. And you also used the word energy at the same time. I assume you were trying to introduce Wayne, who's the CEO of Creative Energy, David. So, hey, Wayne, how are you?
Great. Yes, and you're right. I am here in Vancouver, not far away from you. Was in Seattle last week visiting some of our customers there. So it's great to be here. I'll just jump right into it. So President and CEO of Creative Energy, and as the name would suggest, we're here to provide creative energy solutions to customers in Canada and the US. We have a long history. We started here in Vancouver. We have a district energy system that we own and operate here. And really what we're about is designing, building, owning, and operating energy systems for customers, whether they be hospitals or municipalities or property developers. We have a whole host of customers that we're focused on. And we'll get into that a little bit later. For me, myself, I'm a heck of a good dancer. Break dancing actually is my specialty. Maybe later, if there's time, I'll show you my coffee grinder move. I'll have to adjust the camera, but maybe at the end we can have a cipher, which I would love to see. No, I can't dance at all. I've got over 30 years of energy experience. I started at TransCanada Pipeline, so I understand the natural gas and electricity infrastructure very well. I then went to Emera Inc., which is a holding company that owns a number of utilities across North America and in the Caribbean. I was also, for a period, president and CEO of Nova Scotia Power, which is a vertically integrated electric utility, has about 2,600 megawatts of generation and transmission and distribution. I was also the president and CEO of ENMAX, which is a municipally owned utility, owns the electric utility distribution utility in Calgary, has about 1,500 megawatts of generation and a utility in Maine. And just 5 weeks ago, I came to Creative Energy, which leads me to your question about, what's the one thing on my mind? When we think about carbon and reduction of carbon across the economy, there's a few big areas. One is transportation, and the car companies, Tesla and others, are well on their way to investing there to decarbonize that. The next big area is production of electricity. Here in the Northwest, Pac Northwest, or in BC, we're blessed with lots of hydro, but that's not the case across North America or the world. So utilities and generators of electricity are spending huge amounts of money to decarbonize. And then the next area where we haven't seen the same kind of focus is buildings. And we do need to address that. We do need to do that rapidly. And the amount of capital that it's going to require is staggering. And it's going to take all of us here and well beyond those that are in this meeting to work cooperatively and coordinate our efforts so that we do that quickly and we do that in a way that's efficient and provides customers with their lowest cost solution. So that's what's on my mind, Ash.
That's great. Well, that's wonderful. By the way, when you said you were a break dancer, I thought, gosh darn it, that's like a dance-off challenge. I thought, hey, Andy, I know that you are a snazzy dresser because you've got that beautiful PSC logoed shirt on. We talked about that earlier. So,
sorry, nobody who wears logo shirts is a fancy dresser. That's just
what? Oh, Andy, that's a little utility trash talking. I don't know.
Hey, that's fine with me. I do. I have a staggering collection of logo wear. And Debra, the next time you talk to Mary Kipp, you ask her. And I am frequently mocked by Mary, our CEO, and others for it, but I'm proud of it. And pro tip, it's a great way to show team spirit and save. Anyway, I've been at the company 15 years, and I have even vintage logo wear now. I started the company in 2008 after working here in television for a long time. Some of you, if you're a longtime resident, remember my dad. He started here in 1969 after working in Commonwealth Edison in Chicago. So I moved here in 1969. And back when he talked about the projects they did in the 60s, they showed up with a bulldozer. And you found out when you heard the bulldozer that they were building in your neighborhood. It's a different era, obviously, today, right? And it's really a different era, even for me in the 15 years I've been at the company. I'm a big believer in the possibility of change. I love the fact that Mary has put out a commitment to be beyond net zero carbon. I think all of that is where our customers want us to go. And when I think about the possibility of change, when I came to the company in 2008, I spent a lot of time out talking to Rotary clubs and Kiwanis and other people. And my job then was to tell people that the wind, which we were building, actually worked. And there are a lot of doubters. That was the days of our first 15% renewable portfolio standard. And you'd always have a guy in the back with his arms folded saying, it doesn't work. Well, we know it does, and that was 15 years ago. We also know there's a lot of progress back then. For me, it was telling people, behold, the wonders of the CFL. And people hadn't tried those funny, twisty light bulbs, and they'd hear on talk radio that if you had to get rid of one, you needed people in moon suits and a hazmat team. A lot of mythology, and now we're beyond that, and you can't find those. You're using an LED. So a lot of possibility of change. And the thing that concerns me, I'm right there with Debra, it's regional markets, the phrase of regional adequacy. Is there enough electricity? Can we get it where it needs to be? And I would liken that to our last couple of years. We all took the supply chain for forgotten. We took it for granted until the pandemic hit. And then suddenly you couldn't find things that were always at the store. Energy is a little bit like that. We can't forget that supply chain because, yes, the buildings need to get smarter, but we can't miss a moment of that reliable power. But thank you for having us here today. I'm really excited to get to do it. And I do, if you want to borrow, I'll go shirt. I got a few.
Yeah. Hey, Andy, I love the point about reliability of power. And I know that you and Debra brought that up. I do think that is actually something we're going to have to pay very, very close attention to. So thank you for raising that very important topic. Hey, Greg, how are you?
Doing good. Thank you.
We are so blessed to have you join us. Thank you. And Greg is leads one of the most innovative development groups at Urban Vision, owner, operator, and super interested in your perspective. Greg, go ahead.
Well, thanks, Ash. Well, first, it's a pleasure to be here and to be surrounded on my screen by people who are much smarter than I am, particularly as it relates to this subject. So I'm going to be as interested as everybody else to hear what they have to say. I'm a real estate developer. My company's called Urban Visions. I'm the CEO. And I guess my focus has been, and for a long, long time, back when I was back visiting Copenhagen in the late 1990s, realizing that we are heading into a climate crisis and we're heading into an energy crisis. And it's happened much faster than I even thought back in 2000. So we're focused on building and designing buildings that are next generation. And it really is, it's the concept of how does the building improve its community? How does the building, historically built buildings around people. Well, I'll say differently. We built buildings and we put people in them. And we've liked to think about how do we design a building around people that improves their health, both mentally and physically. And as it relates to energy, we've done the low-hanging fruit in our buildings from the standpoint of, because we live in the Northwest, we're all electric. So we don't have to use, gas any longer or any other sort of, but we're thinking about what do we do with concrete and from the carbon perspective. So anyway, it's a pleasure to be here. And I guess the thought that I have, which may relate to this is, we have this battle between let's reduce the amount of windows we have to save energy. But, if we keep reducing the amount of windows we have, we're going to have little peepholes for people to look out of. And so this is battle between your mental health and your well-being being inside a building and trying to make them energy efficient. So there you have it.
Yeah, Greg, thank you. By the way, I'm actually connecting from Houston right now. My daughter got married this weekend. And I will say that talk about buildings with very small windows. I've noticed that, particularly looking around now. Downtown's beautiful. but a lot of these suburban sprawl buildings in Houston have very, very tiny, narrow windows, Greg.
I mean, it just, and I guess where I was trying to go that, what's the cost between where, we're trying to, I mean, we have to do something about the climate crisis, but the answer isn't, the mathematical equation of how we can reduce energy in a building at the expense of someone's mental health or physical health. So it's that fine line that we all are, trying to find that sweet spot.
Yeah, we are not real estate developers at McKinstry, but we did build a cross-laminated timber building in Spokane, Washington called Catalyst, and love to have anybody come join us. But yeah, we really tried to figure out how to balance natural materials in the building plus the size of windows. And I think we achieved that with a pretty strong EUI and all electric. But you're right, there is a balance that needs to be struck. And it can't just be buildings with no windows. That doesn't sound very people friendly at all. Hey, let me turn the topic into something a little bit more specific about carbon emissions. So we know that we have been seeing, of course, regulatory and even customers like Greg driving from a utility perspective and maybe from a McKinstry perspective, excuse me, for the use of term customer, around what to do within the built environment. And, all of us are facing these new responsibilities related to carbon emissions. So David, you mentioned the role that you're coming into the University of Washington, which seems like quite a daunting task as alum, you and I, of the University of Washington. All that stuff that's buried underground needs to be dealt with because it's got its age limit. But you said it, there's also a big carbon emission. So I'd like to just ask a few panelists a little bit about how each of your organizations are reacting to current and what you perceive to be future limits on carbon emissions all the way to elimination. So David, what is UW thinking and acting on? You gave us a little tidbit of it. Tell us a little bit more.
Yeah, well, I think the element is there's neat opportunities, and the UW has a wealth of them. We have a district cooling system, we have the district heating system. There are, in the last decade, one of the breakthrough technologies has been water-based heat pumps and the lift temperature and COP that you can have from them. So the idea of converting the campus steam distribution system to a hot water distribution system and using that to heat the buildings instead of the steam creates opportunities to use those heat pumps to take the waste heat from the cooling system and reclaim and reuse that waste heat, lift it up and use it as the primary source for that hot water. The same technology can be applied to the regional sewer lines that literally are within blocks of both campus energy centers on the campus. I mean, when I was at UBC, we were looking at waste heat recovery that was 5 miles away and under the Fraser River, and we were considering it. Here, it's right beside the two plants. It couldn't be any closer. And then thirdly, taking advantage of the lake. And I realized that and recognized, and everyone told me when I first got here, wait a second, Dave, a whole bunch of environmental hurdles that you would have to go through in addressing from a deep lake cooling standpoint. But one of the things that I've come to learn quite quickly is there's a significant issue with the salmon in the shipping canal and the temperatures being too high. And so the thought is to not only use that deep lake cooling to address campus issues, but also return that cold water into the shipping canal and reduce the temperature and help address the salmon issue. So that's the elevator pitch, but there's a potential real exciting opportunity in making the problem bigger. So those are kind of the 3 big ones, and it's all the same technology. It's all revolving around water-based heat pumps and a big switch of steam to hot water. But we did do the steam to hot water conversion up at UBC, and so this is the second run through here. So daunting, but doable.
Yeah, good. Well, and taking from both your earlier comments and now the University of Washington is really quite committed and focused on the elimination of carbon. I mean, I think that I know that you have explicitly said that, so forgive me for restating that. But
that's why I've been hired, Ash.
Right? Yeah.
That's
well,
specifically that's like the number one line of, hey, we're hiring Dave Woodson because you are here to decarbonize the steel plant. Right? Okay.
Good.
Everything else is extra. That's why I'm here.
I love that. Hey, Wayne, you all have been doing a really nice job decarbonizing systems that you own up in Vancouver. And I know that from what I understand about Creative Energy, you are fully committed to decarbonizing and eliminating, or I should say, converting your systems and or supporting the conversion of systems, both in Canada and now in the United States. So how does your organization react to both current and future requirements to carbon elimination?
Yeah, exactly, Ash. So David more or less stole all of my speaking points. So thank you, David. But what David spoke about is really what we're focused on doing and delivering to customers who may not have the background experience that David has. So for instance, in Seattle, we're working with a Swedish hospital on their First Hill campus to convert that entirely away from carbon-based steam to non-emitting resources, and exactly what David said. So the technology has developed to the point where we can do things differently. And what we try to do is we try to bring really just some innovative and creative thinking to the table. And we really listen to what the customers need. Each one's a little bit different. Their requirements are a little bit different. Their objectives are different. So we really try and tailor the end platform, energy platform to them. And what we also look to do is there opportunities around these campuses, around these communities, around these platforms to use, and it's often excess heat, to use that to serve other buildings around. So we can also get them to convert away from their heating and cooling systems to a low or no carbon system. So that's what we're doing in Seattle and other places. We're looking to do that. And with our own district energy system here in Vancouver, it's quite old, built in the 60s, like many of these systems were. And we're in the process of converting it away from carbon. We're still going to use natural gas, likely in the short term, but we're also putting in electric boilers. So we're going to eventually move that system to 100% non-emitting. And we've also, in that process, been able to work with BC Hydro, the utility here, to coordinate our activities with them so that we could avoid putting more strain on this distribution system. So we're working with them. They're going to bring in a transmission line right down into our plant here and allow us to make that conversion to electric boilers. So that's what we're doing today and for the future, Ash.
That's great. Wow. That's wonderful. Hey, Andy, PSC has always been super innovative. I should tell you that 30 years ago, when I first got into the industry, if it wasn't for people at Puget Power back then and their mentorship and support, I don't know what I would have done in my career. So that your organization has a special place in my heart, and I know has been really quite supportive of a lot of real innovation that has happened generally. You're all working to decarbonize, as you mentioned. You do provide natural gas. Wayne mentioned this kind of bridge between natural gas, but yet we've got this tension of having to go fast. And so what are you all thinking on the PSE side relative to the balance between serving clients and moving to a more, of course, fully decarbonized infrastructure and system?
Well, I think in a lot of ways, and by the way, I'll send you a shirt for your kind remarks. I think in a lot of ways, I think we'd argue there isn't a balance. They're the same in that sense of a balance between serving customers and decarbonizing. We're going to serve customers by decarbonizing and help them do it. So I think it's really an alignment there. A couple of different things. We have our commitment to Beyond Net Zero that Mary put forward, I think almost 2 years ago now. And so moving forward on that's been a great process, and one where we've also brought in with former Governor Gregoire leading kind of a blue ribbon panel that Debra is kind enough to serve on, along with environmental leaders, community leaders, to get a lot of voices into the conversation, because ultimately all of this has to work for a lot of people of different pressures, tensions, and goals. Where can we find unity and where can we find alignment to move ahead? I think that's always the key. Then, from a regulatory standpoint, we have kind of pieces that work on both the electric and the gas side that we've supported. The 2019, the CETA, the Clean Energy Transition Act from the state that gets us cleaner by 2030 and into the 2040s. And then the Carbon Commitment Act, which is impactful on the electric side, but mostly on the gas side, which drives decarbonization in gas. And there's a couple of things we're doing. We don't want to, in a sense, throw out the pipe with the fuel. Piped energy has a really important future in our region. And in some ways we take it for granted because it's always there. It works quietly in the background, but on a cold day, it's about 2/3 of the energy we use in this region. It's a lot of energy. So we need to put a lot of thought into making it better. And in many cases, that means renewable gas. And it was great a couple of weeks ago, Ash, I was with one of your colleagues in Tacoma, where McKinstry and PSC and Tacoma Utilities had worked on bringing renewable gas from their wastewater treatment plant. It's also, I think, about hydrogen, which we can use as a storage facility, kind of a battery on hydrogen. That's a fantastic thing for us. And then for our customers, it's about getting out. And you made this point earlier. We used to stop at the meter and in a way be proud of it. It was kind of like, we treat everyone the same. You're all meters. That doesn't work. We need to get beyond that. And so we have programs that are helping building owners as well as industrial and commercial customers and operators, because I think one of the key pieces of this is education. We have a lot of great and willing customers who have a business imperative. They may know it's part of their ESG initiatives. They may know that it's part of them being a supplier to somebody else. They know they need to get cleaner. In some cases, it may be they're responding to employees who wouldn't be there if it's not a place that's clean, but they need education, they need help to get there. And I think that's the piece that's so vital for us. Yeah, we can clean up what's coming through the pipe or down the wire, but we need to work with our customers to take action because they can't get there without us. We can't get there without them. I think it's great. I think it's very complicated, but I think the future of it's exciting. When I think about our whole region too together, if we all do this well, we become an incredibly competitive region. We stay in a competitive region economically, which is, I think, good for all of us.
That's wonderful. That's couldn't agree with the idea of making sure that we're supporting customers, as you put it, really beyond the meter. I love that. And I'm really appreciative of your thoughts there. Hey, Greg, again, I don't mean to overly inflate the work that Urban Visions is doing, but truly from everything.
Keep going.
Well, no, I mean, truly, Greg, from the things that I see your organization working on and the way that you're all taking a pretty good, you're taking a leadership stance. You're actually stepping up and leading, and that's what's required. So what are you all thinking about relative to the current and future requirements to eliminate carbon? You've already kind of gone all electric with your buildings. Anything else that you're thinking about that people should know about?
Well, yes. I think I mentioned concrete, because I think that's, in the grand scheme, I think that's one of the biggest carbon emitters. And I think, again, I'm speaking to experts, so you guys can either nod or whatever, right? But I go back to what Andy said. I guess where I'm really focused on now is we are trying to work with the best in class, many of you here, on rethinking the building of the future. But what I really want to see is education, and for decision makers of whether it's businesses that choose to where they're going to move to, or government bodies of who they're going to incentivize. Right now, we can do a great building, but I still don't. You don't quite see you're not getting the user to say, I'm going to go to that building because of their commitment to ESG and DEI and their energy policies, versus a building across the street that maybe isn't. And I really think we need to educate and start supporting those buildings and developers and communities that are making that effort. I think it's coming, and maybe it has to be mandated to some degree, but I think today's, you got to figure out how to get people back to the office. So you have to create commute-worthy real estate. And I think a lot of people have a great care about their, especially young kids, their world, the climate, just what's going on. And I think about the Prius with a dashboard. I think if we can help people understand what energy, how they're using the energy, what their building's doing as far as energy, more so than historically, maybe that will help, right? There's some down to the, the person sitting at a desk and understanding the energy that's going on in their building. But I think high level, we need to get leaders outside of us to start saying, I'm going to that building because of what they've done as a team.
Yeah. I think that's wonderful. The the next set of questions I'd like to ask you all, and I'm going to see if maybe you could just raise your hand in front of me to see if you're interested in answering this question. I'm curious, we talked about, Debra, I really appreciate the fact that I do find this IRA, Inflation Reduction Act, to be pretty unprecedented, but I do think that sometimes we do overuse words. So I'm glad that both you and I are using that word with regard to this act, because if you look through it, it is really quite stunning. But hey, in the Pacific Northwest, we really have taken some policy leadership, and now we've got and again, I'm referring, when I say IRA, the Inflation Reduction Act, IRA. So there are both the Climate Commitment Act, Andy mentioned CETA, we now have this IRA. What should we be paying close attention to? And in particular, with regard to the IRA, I know it's really new, but does anybody have any thought with regard to what we should be paying attention to with regard to these new bits of funding and changes in policy, and why? Andy, you came off a mute pretty fast. Do you want to start us off?
Sure, it's like Jeopardy or something.
Yeah.
Well, I guess the one.
Please phrase your answer in the form of a question, please.
I'll do what I can. I'm no Ken Jennings. Two things. I think these things, when I think where they were precedented, I think about the Treasury grants from the Obama era, and those worked very well for us. When we built our Lower Snake River Wind project in Southeast Washington in 2012, those Treasury grants helped reduce the cost to our customers of that project. So yes, we received a Treasury grant. It didn't go to the company. It offset the cost, because in our regulations with the UTC, that was factored into what should go into our rates. So it was a good thing in terms of it allowed us to put more clean energy on the grid faster at less cost to everybody here who pays the bill. It's a good thing. I hope the IRA can do the same thing. What made me want to jump in, though, is I think exactly what we're doing here is really important to that process. As we apply and compete with the rest of the country for grants and other things, it's going to be the teamwork that's going to be the difference. It's going to be public utilities, private utilities, building owners, tribes, communities of color. It's going to be teamwork like that that's going to be the difference for us. So I appreciate this conversation, because maybe it helps plant the seeds for applications that stand out because they represent teamwork. If we can be unprecedented there, I think our chances of having some of that goodness come here increase.
I think that's really great. I want to jump in on that, because I've been thinking about, we talk about across the aisle being the D's and the R's, but I think in our industry across the aisle is City Light working with PSC directly, which is not something that happened for a very long time. And I'll tell you why it's important. It is important in ways that people don't think about. For instance, City Light, in order to do an accurate assessment of resource adequacy with respect to the energy transformation, we had to rely on PSC for information about heating load, because we don't know who's heating with gas versus electricity. And so PSC, we were able to use and contract with the Electric Power Research Institute, EPRI, and they worked with PSC and City Light to do our electrification study, which is now driving a lot of our work. We would not have been able to do that without PSC. And now we're very early in some conversations that could in fact benefit from IRA funding. We are very early in conversations about dual fuel heat pumps and a pilot program that PSE and City Light may use, where you can actually continue to receive the benefits of natural gas for peak load. And so that's the dual fuel piece, but you're using electricity, which in our market, again, we are primarily carbon free. So to the extent you're electrifying, you are getting carbon free resource. And that's also, you know, PSE on the electric side is becoming more and more carbon free as well because of CETA. So there are ways for us to work together just in terms of sharing information, but there's also ways for us to work together in terms of creating the future that are our shared customers, because we do share a number of customers, and they don't want to get into it between City Light and PSE. They just want us to help them with this transformation. The last thing I want to say is just that Washington State has been a leader in terms of creating a regulatory framework that will lead us into lead us to the future in a much better place than we are today with respect to environmental justice, carbon, emissions, et cetera. And that's incredibly important. But up until now, that has kind of been for the, you know, mom and pop customer out there, has been something of an unfunded mandate. And we talk about this, I think about this all the time. I think that the IRA is amazing, and the incentives that are going to become available for customers are awesome. But it's got to be the beginning, because honestly, we can create a framework and we can create funding at the central source level, which the Infrastructure Act is doing in many ways. But the transformation requires action at the individual customer, the individual homeowner, the individual business, as we've heard, perspective. And without funding there, it won't happen. I like to use the example of, I have a home in Eugene, Oregon, and sorry, Andy, but just this year, as much as I like Northwest Natural, I decided to replace my gas furnace with an all-electric heat pump system. By the way, the installer thought I was crazy not to be using a dual heat system, and couldn't understand why I would do that. But it cost me $17,000. I can afford that. Most people can't. And we are not dealing with that reality yet in the most meaningful way.
Debra, thank you so much. And I think you're right. I think you're right. It's not everyone is at the same level of understanding, let alone financial capability to take on decarbonization together. And I know that you all have a very large customer base that you're trying to support. I think just one comment about Seattle City Light, and I think most people might know this. You know, under your leadership, Debra, I think people know this, but I just want to note something, that the team that you have built is a team of innovators and collaborators. I'm not saying that the past Seattle City Light wasn't like that, but I know that the current Seattle City Light is like that. And I think that level of collaboration and trying to solve problems in ways that are not, at least have not been typical for Seattle City Light, I think has been really critical and is very well noted by those of us in the industry. So thank you for that leadership. Hey, Wayne, go ahead. You got your hand up, I think. I can't believe it. I just want to note that Wayne from Canada is going to talk to us about U.S. legislation and the Inflation Reduction Act. Go ahead, Wayne.
Fear not, Ash. I won't do that, because I know it's not welcome when it's coming back the other way.
No. I was joking with you. Anything is welcome.
I was only going to make a couple points. So first of all, my mother and father emigrated from Ireland. So for me, the IRA has a completely different meaning, and I'm not going to say anything about IRA. But I will say this, I mentioned it earlier, is that to decarbonize, we need incredible amounts of capital, far beyond anything we've done as a society before. And it takes everybody rowing in the same direction. So I welcome funding from anyone, quite frankly, and I think it needs to be happening more and more. And Creative does that on a small scale. It brings capital to customers to help them with their funding of programs. I think what for us, as we think about governments, we actually think the most interesting things are happening at the city, state or in Canada province level. The feds do what the feds do, and sometimes that's helpful, sometimes it's confusing. But really, the interesting things, I believe, are happening more locally, and that the leadership, which has been mentioned quite a few times, is really happening there. So when we think about where can we bring our expertise and our capital, we do it at a really local level, because I think that's where the interesting things are happening. And I know the people here are leading their organizations and making changes in their communities. So I just wanted to add that, Ash. I think that's an important part for us, at least, as we look at where we should go next.
Yeah, thank you, Wayne. I really want to move on to the next topic, but I want to add a comment about funding or different sources of funding. You know, again, in the time that I've had in this industry, in this career, I've never seen more private funding being made available to decarbonization. I've now found myself, which I never really thought I would ever say out loud, you know, that I don't know if funding or capital is the problem. I think innovation, structure, public-private partnerships were appropriate. I think that's where the real opportunity comes right now. There's just more capital, both public and private, sitting, waiting for leadership to emerge and to take on new innovative approaches to put that capital work, particularly as it relates to decarbonization. Hey, Greg, a question for you here. You'd mentioned, you know, buildings have been built primarily, of course, to house people, you know, whether they be schools or hospitals, of course, commercial office buildings. But expectations, are they changing with regard to tenants? Are you seeing major tenants of yours having a very different set of expectations with regard to what they expect your buildings to do, perform, act like?
Absolutely. I mean, I think we're in the middle of the greatest change that we've experienced in our lives, right? Caused because of the pandemic. But people are really, I think, are now deciding, where do I want to work? Why do I want to work? Who do I want to work for? What? And so there's this massive change going on that we're still trying to figure out. And I think not only the pandemic, but also just the fires and things like that that we're seeing. I really think we have to start from the scratch, and users and their employees, especially when we have an employment rate that's at 3%, where the employee has a decision of where they want to work and who they want to work for. I think I'm hoping we're at this cusp of buildings that are really, truly taking a step towards, like I say, improving your community through addressing climate change. You know, the buildings are really making an effort to save energy and improve their health. That you're going to start seeing employers and employee, and whether it's an employee or a resident, are really going to start making choices to go to those properties that are making those efforts. Because if they don't, it's just not going to change nearly as fast as it needs to change. So I'm hoping, because of what we've experienced, buildings, whether they're residential, office, that are making a great effort and can educate the consumer of what they are doing, are going to succeed. And that's going to drive the whole development community, because, right, developers are basically going to follow the herd, and if something's successful, that's where they're going to go. But somehow we got to make that happen, and I am hoping that's what's happening. It's going to happen because we are in the middle of this very confusing time.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like the way that you've been thinking about that. I guess, yeah, 3% unemployment, particularly in the Pacific Northwest of Puget Sound area. I buy that in the drive to try to get folks back in the office. That makes great sense.
I mean, one thing I think about too is, the cities right now, a lot of cities are suffering. There's 50% of the people are back in the cities. But if we're thinking about carbon, and I don't know, you guys would know the answer to this more, But if it's a flight to the suburbs or the exurbs and cities are failing, is that going to be the answer to the climate crisis? It seems to me that sprawl is not the answer to the climate crisis. It's not efficient. So, what do we need to do in the bigger picture is make cities successful and make buildings successful in those cities. And so, that's where I spend a lot of my thoughts too, is,
But if I can jump in, we're talking about the energy transformation, but obviously one of the reasons this is so incredibly complicated is because there's all these other societal changes happening at the same time. When I got to the city 4 years ago, I'm sitting here at Seattle Municipal Tower right now, 700 Fifth Avenue. And when I got here, some city departments had begun a process called stacking, which was a very unsexy, unromantic way of referring to remodeling the floors and getting people in more consistent office spaces in the city floors. So City Light, I think we have about 6-7 floors of this building. And we didn't have the money to do that. I mean, when I looked at where we were going to spend capital dollars, remodeling our spaces didn't rise to the top. But I tell you what, during the pandemic, it did, because we concluded that we could give up a property that we're leasing in a couple of years. It's across the street where our Customer Energy Solutions group goes. And we are doing the thing now that you don't love, Greg, but that is we're getting smaller. So we are now moving forward with an office plan that has us able to move those people across the street, because people don't work here every day anymore, and I don't think they ever will. And if I required them to, and of course it's not my decision, so just so we're clear, the city is working on that and they're talking with labor right now. But we're looking at 2-3 days a week. Unless you're in the office and you're committed to 3 days a week, every week, you don't have your own space anymore. And I think that's the way things are going. And I live downtown, so I'm actually a big advocate personally for the very thing you're talking about, because I live and work downtown and commute by foot. But it is just, it is a crazy time. I can't compete on salary as a public employee. The only way I can compete is on work-life balance and flexibility.
Yeah, the thing I would, that's awesome. The thing I love that. The fact,
okay, good.
Because, and I think what you're going to see is the bifurcation of real estate like you've never seen before. Old buildings with old systems and new buildings with, next generation systems. Those are going to win and old buildings are going to lose. And you're going to see, even though they're smaller, you might have a smaller footprint. If you're a progressive, caring business, you're going to locate in buildings that are forward thinking versus old buildings that aren't. And the only last thing I would say is I wish our government bodies would lead by example and go to new buildings that are in the next generation, right? Versus being in old buildings.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, we're going to have to find our way with, nationally, nearly 90 billion square feet of existing buildings. We might have to find a way to renovate old buildings to next generation systems. Greg, what do you think of that?
Absolutely, but that might be converting old office to residential because we have a housing crisis, so we have to repurpose our buildings.
Interesting. Yeah, good point. Yeah.
But
Ash, I'll jump in. Just
yeah, of course.
One of the part that's interesting for us is that we're kind of a developer, a building owner, and a utility, and like we're kind of all of the above for 20 million square feet. And so we kind of, everything that everyone's describing is what we actually deal with on the campus. And so there is an opportunity to kind of use the campus as, in essence, a sandbox, a test bed of what are the things that we can learn that we can apply. And I think two things jump out. One is, the reference to the availability of the workforce and technical staff, right? Well, if we make really complex new buildings in 200 buildings across our campus, that's not going to be sustainable in terms of our ability to find the staff to take care and maintain all of that. But if we can consolidate that technical piece, right, in our central plants and our district systems, now we have a chance to win across our campus setting. So from the standpoint of actually being able to get the technical resources to take care of that. So there's and so then it leads to this conversation around how the optimization of the building versus the optimization of the district. And I always be the one who will say, hey, make the building as optimal energy performing as you can. But I'd also suggest you don't need to make it perfect, as long as you have the mechanisms to reclaim that excess energy and reuse it somewhere else that needs it. And that's the sort of the power of the district system. So anyway, there's a whole bunch of pieces that, as people were talking it through, that just I feel stand out in a big way on our campus setting. And so maybe there's an element of, although it makes it complex for someone like Greg as a developer, but the ability to sort of connect up to the neighbor and or neighbors could be a way in which solves a lot of problems moving forward.
Yeah, David, I have to tell you, I actually fully subscribe to that. Shared energy, shared resources, moving energy around, crossing boundary conditions that we never crossed before, as I mentioned, whether they be the meter, and as you mentioned, whether they be the sewer system. We've got to find and tap all of that to create innovation. Okay, as predicted, this hour went by very fast. And I really feel like we could have stayed on for 2 hours with this group. I'm going to move to close with each of you. And here's the thing I'm going to try to do here. I'm going to give you whatever you want to answer as your close, but in particular, if you could think about the pace of change. Usually I ask, what do you think is going to happen in 3 to 5 years? Now I wonder what's going to happen in 12 months, in about a year. I think that's how quickly things are shifting and changing. In particular, I wonder about partnerships. I wonder about what we might need to see happen amongst parties that have partnered but need to create different relationships. Let's go lightning round. How about we start with you, Andy, for your close?
Sure.
And,
I'm
sorry to press you, but
no,
yeah.
I'm right there with you. I think it's the partnerships. If we're going to be successful in the next year on the IRA and getting funding and grants there, it's going to be around the partnerships. The other thing to me is, as we're talking about all this, I think we need to shift the conversation from cost to value, so that people see that it's quality of product. I worked at a QFC years ago in high school. Tomatoes were about 9 cents. They were pale red and plastic. That's not the tomato you buy today at the store. We need to have people think of the same thing with energy and get off of cents per kilowatt or dollars per square foot and start thinking about value. That's how we get to better buildings.
That's great. Wayne, how about you?
Ash, I was hoping you're going to give me a couple more minutes so I could formulate some kind of great answer. I think, with the change, the only thing I know for sure is it's going to accelerate. So if you're contemplating what you should be doing in the future, you need to take action now, because in 2 or 3 years, this space is going to be so crowded, and it's going to take you so much longer to get the things done that you need to get done. So I would just encourage people who are thinking, 2030 is a long ways off. It's not that far away. And a lot of this is very complicated work, requires a lot of coordination. A lot of partners need to be brought in. So by its very nature, it's slow. So I would just encourage people to get moving sooner than later.
Great, thank you. Debra?
Two things. One is that in 12 months, I would fully expect that the partnerships we are already enjoying at City Light with both PSC and the University of Washington will be going even stronger. And we really do believe that there's no way to create this energy future without doing it together. But the thing I think we're going to see in 12 months is, we talk about resource adequacy. I think we're going to be talking about a different form of resource adequacy. I think we're going to be talking about, I think it was, as Greg mentioned, the unemployment rate, which is so incredibly low, supply chain issues. I think we're going to see dollars flowing out of the federal government within about 12 months. And we're going to struggle to put those dollars to use. I worry about that, and I'm not sure that that has been fully baked, particularly the supply chain disruptions that we are experiencing for raw materials. I'm not sure that's been baked into timelines coming out of DC.
Thank you. Good point. Greg, what do you think?
Well, first, it's just great to be here. So thanks again. And 12 months, I think it's going to be tough. I think we're sailing into a serious storm right now. I think things are going to get tougher. So I think that gives us some time from the development perspective to, I think the key is education. We need to educate the consumer, and we need to educate, well, I'll just leave it at the consumer, whether it's the individual or to business, to start prioritizing locating in buildings and places that are making big steps towards decarbonization.
Thank you, Greg. David, you've got the final word here.
Wow. Okay. Well, first of all, thanks for having me. This has been a lot of fun. I'm making quick notes here. Debra, Andy, yeah, like partnerships on a whole new scale for the next 12 months with our organizations. I think we've had great working relationships on multiple levels for many years, but I think there's some unique things that we can do working together that I could see happening in the next 12 months. Wayne, your comment around timing, yeah, the sense of urgency, I feel like I'm 2 years behind already, to be honest, in a 2030 target, right? Like, you know, there's big things to happen in a short period of time, and it's going to race by. And we, you know, when we did it at UBC on the hot water conversion, it was a 7-year project, and it felt like we were racing the whole time. And, you know, and so here we are doing it on a slightly bigger scale with a little more elements added on. So, yeah, I think 12 months, Ash, it's on partnerships, but the race is on, the pressure is there, and yeah, we need to act now.
You are each awesome individuals by yourselves, and you all work for wonderful organizations. Thank you so much. Again, I appreciate the time. Sorry we ran over, but thank you. You've shared quite a bit of awesome knowledge that I think everyone that was listening in will take something from. Be well and have a wonderful rest of the week. Thanks,
Ash.
Thank you all. Take care.
Thanks, Ash. Thanks, everyone.
Thank you all.